Conservative leader Pierre Poilievre there giving us a taste of what Canadians can expect as he returns to Parliament this week. Since winning a seat back in the House, Poilievre has been relentlessly focused on the cost of living, housing and crime. On the other side of the aisle, Prime Minister Mark Carney continues to be seized with his plan to safeguard and diversify Canada's economy in the face of Trump's tariffs.
Change of the magnitude that we're undertaking is never easy. It's going to take time. Demands focus and determination. Also needs a united response, not seen in this country since the Second World War. It's never been more necessary for us as Canadians to put aside our differences and focus on the things that we can control.
Will Canadians give Carney the time he says he needs, or will Poilievre win out and set the agenda this fall? Our Sunday strategy session is here to talk about that. Kathleen Monk is a former NDP strategist and Director of Communications to the late Jack Layton. Kory Teneycke was Ontario Premier Doug Ford's campaign manager and former Director of Communications for Prime Minister Stephen Harper. And Scott Reid is a CTV News political analyst and former Communications Director to Prime Minister Paul Martin. Hi, everybody. Hey Scott, I'll start with you. The marquee part of the week for the government was the announcement of the first 5 quote-unquote major projects. How do you think they landed it?
Well, mixed reaction from stakeholders and oppositions in provinces, but I thought it was successful insofar as, you know, the Prime Minister and the government really did drive the national conversation for a few days last week, and that was in contrast to the week prior, and you know, in comparison to, say, the cabinet retreat, where it really felt like they did not lay down a narrative, they did not have a driving argument. And so, at least by talking about building faster, building further, talking about the specific projects, and people are going to say, well, my project isn't on the list, or is my project going to be on the next list? And questions arise, obviously, about whether these things will come to pass. But at least they were dominating the discussion. It looked more structured, more strategic, and a little more thought through.
Yeah, to Scott's point, Kory, that was in contrast to the week before, where Poilievre was every day coming out kind of with a new press conference and a new issue, and they seemed to be reacting rather than actually starting a conversation on anything. At the same time, this list, you could hear in the Prime Minister's comments and others the constant caveat, like there's another one coming, and even markers in time with the Grey Cup and the World Cup and the Stanley Cup. Your thoughts on how that all went down?
Yeah, I heard all of that, and I generally agree with what Scott said. I think the government had a better week. They didn't jam a week's worth of announcements into a Friday, which is when you normally bury news. So, you know, maybe slightly better marks than the week before in terms of the comms rollout. But that said, I don't think the reaction was as positive as it could have been had they spent a little bit more time thinking about regionally balancing some of those projects and being a little closer to where provinces are on this. You know, if you're Ontario, looking at that list, it's pretty underwhelming. There's a nuclear project that's already underway, and here I thought the objective here was to start new things, not do a re-announcement of a project that's already well under construction. So, I think for Ontario, not a great day in terms of what that list was. I guess we will see what these additional announcements look like going forward. But frankly, from where I'm sitting right now, underwhelmed.
It feels like there was great effort on the part of the government to mitigate political risk with this iteration of the list, Kathleen, right? To Kory's point, you know, some of the projects are already underway. Others are like just await an investment decision, for example, in LNG Phase 2 by the companies that comprise LNG Canada. You know, other projects like the hint towards pipelines or the Ring of Fire, like that carries with it a lot more political risk.
More political risk, and the list was developed in a way that was regionally, you know, spread out. But as you mentioned, a lot of shovels already in the ground, stuff already moving, and that means that really the announcement this past week was more about signal than substance. There wasn't any money. In fact, the Prime Minister dodged all the real heavy questions on money and what kind of commitments are being made, and pushed it further down the line to this mid-November Grey Cup list that will be coming out. But the whole week was about setting the stage for what's going to happen tomorrow on Monday, and it's all about, you know, everybody returning to the House, Parliament resuming, and how the opposition and the government will face off. And you know, really what we've seen is Poilievre still driving, even if he was less in the past week, still driving on the issue sets that mattered most for Canadians: housing, employment, crime, and really driving into the anxiety that Canadians, and particularly the youth, are feeling around how just unaffordable life is. So how that will play out in the House, where the Liberals will try to seek their support in the House for a budget that looks like increasingly like it's going to be about cuts, is going to be interesting, because I don't think they have a dance partner in the Democrats. Increasingly with their anti-climate announcements or reversal of climate announcements, they won't have the block.
Climate competitiveness.
Yeah, carbon competitiveness.
Climate competitiveness.
They will not have the block support. So are they going to now have the Conservatives as their main dance partner? A dance partner who, I remind you, for the past 2 years did everything they could to gum up the works of Parliament, and now it looks like they may be the ones that are going to have to grease the wheels.
Well, that dynamic is very interesting to me, Scott, and I wondered, I had raised it this week, I think, on one of the shows, but at that cabinet retreat, I was asking, anybody who would lend me their time in the upper echelons of the Carney government, like, what's your view of Poilievre? Like, do you think, given the winning of the by-election and sort of the summer that passed, like, do you still consider him a threat in the way he would have been seen prior to the general election? And almost resoundingly, they were very dismissive of the idea. And I wonder if you think that is the view largely of the Carney orbit, and whether you think that's a mistake.
Well, if that is the view, it is a mistake. You don't underestimate somebody who carried the Conservative Party to 40+% in the popular vote in the last election, even if you outpace that. So I do think, this session sets the stage for a new phase in, the mano-a-mano contest between Carney and Poilievre. I still like the problems that Carney has versus the problems that Poilievre has. Poilievre's personal leadership numbers are in the ditch. He's got to show something, and he's got to do something to alter the public impression of who he is, what he stands for, and whether or not he could ever actually fill the suit of prime minister. But you don't ever go into a turbulent political process like the one we're about to witness. You don't ever go into a weakening economy and a toughening situation by underestimating your opponent. I doubt they really are, but they certainly don't want to signal that privately, publicly, or even to the mirror.
I would also note, like, as far as delineating a Carney government response to Poilievre and the Conservatives from a Trudeau response, that you can see, not necessarily very quickly, but there is a more substantive response to the issues that he's bringing up. And I'll highlight crime, for example, where the Liberals, I think, left quite a vacuum over the summer for other levels of government and the Conservatives to fill. Now, this week, we see the Minister of Justice coming out and saying there are going to be 3 different pieces of legislation aimed at 3 different aspects of crime that we hear about quite frequently. Do you think, if they are more quick to respond than the previous government to issues like immigration and crime, that is to their advantage, or is there some risk to that as well?
I think it's to their advantage to get ahead of these issues to a greater extent. They're going to be issues whether the Liberals want them to be or not. You only have to walk through the downtown of almost any city in Canada right now to see what appears to be an out-of-control situation on the streets. And you can go through many of the suburbs and you have a different kind of out-of-control situation with home invasions and out-of-control car theft. Those things are real issues, and frankly, they probably cost Carney his majority in the last election. If you look at which seats they were expected to win in places like Peel Region and then ultimately didn't, where crime was a huge issue and where immigration was a huge issue. So I think they need to get ahead of those things. I think they need to take some of that territory back by letting some of the pressure out of them by taking them seriously. So bail reform, yes. Hopefully things like mandatory minimum sentencing for certain crimes, and a commitment to getting the immigration numbers under control. That's one that actually I think was started under the and trying to get control of it under Mark Miller in the last in the last government. But I think there's more work to be done there, and if they don't do it, then the Conservatives will take those issues. But the big issue, I think, where it's going more than any of those things will be jobs. If we continue to see the economy soften, I think you'll see affordability decline as an issue relative to that of jobs. You're not worried about the price of toothpaste if you don't have a job and you're now worried about paying your mortgage and the like. So there's a lot there.
Last for
Yeah, well, paychecks always trump in terms of any other issue, in terms of if you lose your job. But I would just say what's interesting is how the Liberals are basically absorbing the entire Conservative agenda. Liberals for years and years and years ignored the bail issue. They ignored the crime issue, the growing crime issue, and to some extent other issues like the housing issue. And how quickly Carney is moving on all of these issues is really going to make Conservatives, I would see Conservatives squirm in terms of what landscape they can, policy landscape they can actually occupy. And so maybe they're going to have to go to more extreme positions on immigration or other issues. On the other hand, progressives, New Democrats, Greens, others have the possibility to take up that space on the left flank.
Yeah, different dynamic, actually. All right, we'll leave it there. Thanks, everybody. Really appreciate it.